Ladies and gentlemen, our national anthem.
American popular culture is more than Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. It is more than the Pledge of Allegiance and Dorothy and her red shoes. American history is the people from all over the world that came here. And American history is the people who were forcibly brought here. In teaching American history, we can no longer erase this as we encourage our students to be learners. This collection of lesson plans focus on Filipino Americans in entertainment. These 5 lessons cover fashion, culinary arts, pop, rock, rap music, and film. We emphasize that Filipino American history is American history.
Fashion is a way for us to express who we are and where we come from. The way people dress tells us about their style as well as their culture and customs. Fashion can also help us learn about the wider history of a group of people. From traditional clothing to streetwear, Filipino Americans have used fashion to tell the story of who they are and push back on stereotypes. They are also innovators in the fashion industry today. In this lesson, students will learn about Filipino American history through fashion. By looking at Filipino students' decision to adopt American-style clothing during the early 20th century, students will learn how fashion challenges our perceptions of people and the ways that traditional clothing evolves as people assimilate into the dominant culture. Next, students will look at the stylish men of the Manong generation to learn about how they used zoot suits and Macintosh suits to distance themselves from their lower status as agricultural workers and look like the movie stars of the 1920s and 1930s. They'll also learn about how these suits contributed to Filipino immigration to the United States. Finally, students will learn about designers Nick Leak, who is the founder of Antisocial Social Club, and Lonnie Alabanza Barcena, a pioneer in women's streetwear, to discuss Filipino American contributions to streetwear and how they have pushed the fashion industry forward. By learning about Filipino American fashion of the past and the present, students will think about how they use fashion to express themselves and consider the stories behind the clothing in their own culture.
So often when we talk about food, we're actually talking about history, family, cultural traditions, memories of loved ones, and our own place in this world. What and how we eat is so integral to our cultural identity. Therefore, understanding a culture's food is understanding that culture itself, their values, and their history. To talk about Filipino food is to talk about hundreds of years of colonization and intermingling with dozens of other cultures and regions. Nearly all of their traditional dishes touch or riff on another type of food. As early as the 9th century, the Philippines were trading and interacting with their neighbors, leading them to develop lumpia and pancit, riffs off of egg rolls and Chinese noodle dishes, respectively. Then, for nearly 500 years, Filipino cuisine developed and adapted from its Spanish and then American colonizers. It can be really difficult to pin down what exactly Filipino food is or isn't. As Filipinos immigrated to America, their food did not stop evolving, with many chefs today riffing with American, European, and other East Asian flavors, creating dishes like ube waffles and bubble tea, Filipino barbecue, or vegan adobo dishes. Yet somehow, this wide and varied cuisine, that by definition is a crowd pleaser, is only just beginning to burgeon on the American foodie scene. Why is that? Why are Americans so familiar with other fusion foods like General Tso's chicken or spaghetti and meatballs, but not with ube-flavored flan or lechon? This lesson will explore more modern American foodways, what gets to be considered American, what doesn't, and what has yet to be considered at all.
From Broadway to TikTok to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and beyond, Filipino American pop and rock artists play a large role in shaping music today. In our lesson on Filipino Americans in pop and rock music, we will look at the careers of several famous Filipino American musicians to observe their impact and role in music history, as well as the importance of visibility and what it means to be a Filipino American icon in popular music. For our pop music lessons, students will learn about Lea Salonga, a singer who is perhaps best known for providing the singing voices for Disney princesses Jasmine and Mulan.
Who's Filipino in this house tonight?
But who opened doors for Filipino American performers on Broadway. In contemporary pop, Olivia Rodrigo is one of the most renowned stars with her hit singles Driver's License and Good For You. But she's not afraid to talk about what it means to be visibly Filipino American in an industry that never seemed to represent her. Over in the world of rock, Joey Santiago is a name that not many students may recognize, but his work shaped rock in the late 80s and 90s. Manila-born Santiago is the guitarist of alt-rock band The Pixies, whose sound influenced groups such as Nirvana, Radiohead, and Weezer. On the other hand, many people the world over are familiar with chart-topping metal band Metallica, though few are aware that guitarist Kirk Hammett is Filipino American. Students will explore the variety of Filipino American experiences by learning about these artists and engaging in discussions about the ways in which Filipino Americans relate to their culture and heritage. Students will demonstrate the power of visibility in American media by researching their own famous Filipino American in pop and rock to create a class Hall of Fame celebrating the accomplishments of these artists in changing the cultural landscape.
Looking at the history of rap music in the Filipino American community means going back and looking at the origins of rap. Think back to the 1970s in the Bronx. Redlining and segregation have pushed communities into dense living conditions based on race. African American youth, in order to express themselves, start their own style called hip-hop. This begins to encompass DJing, MCing, breakdancing, graffiti, and social knowledge. People begin to record DJ sets from house parties and share them around their neighborhood. Imagine being pushed to the edges of society and not having access to the other forms of art seen on TV or heard on the radio. You create your own. You rap about what it's like in your community. You rap about the problems of the country. It's free. Filipino Americans who are also pushed to the outskirts of society joined this movement. They began to listen to these tapes shared at these parties. Many even sent tapes home to the Philippines, making it one of the first countries outside the United States to embrace rap. In the San Francisco Bay Area, the Filipino American DJ community thrived in the 80s and 90s and began to influence other music in that area. This specific lesson embraces and builds on this history of rap. Rap is now one of the most popular genres of music, and it is embraced by the world. It is used by the Filipino American community to express themselves, to express their need for social justice, and to bond over their heritage. When a student takes this class, they'll learn about this history. They'll build upon the history of rap and think about rap as art. It'll help them learn to see how an artist can be connected to their art and how their heritage can be involved. By looking at influential Filipino American artists like Saweetie, Her, and Chad Hugo, students will think about how heritage intersects with rap. Rap is an American legacy, and this lesson shows that Filipino American rap music is American history.
We invite you to come with us for a trip to the movies. Our lesson on the history of Filipino Americans in film and television examines the changing representation of Filipino Americans on the big screen over time, as well as the contributions of Filipino American artists to the history of American cinema. We begin in the 1930s, when the United States was still a colonial power in the Philippines, and Filipino representation in films was unflattering and inaccurate. Moving on to the work of Feli Frankeli, who was one of the first Filipina actors to have a major English-speaking role in the 1945 film Back to Bataan.
Why do you fight?
Over the Manila radio, the voice...
We help students to draw conclusions about the impact of colonization on Filipino American representation in the film industry. From there, we provide examples of Filipino American actors, directors, and animators working today, showing that while their contributions to popular works such as Avatar: The Last Airbender, Rugrats, and RuPaul's Drag Race have been significant, there's still progress to be made before Filipino Americans are represented equitably on the big screen. An example of this that we also touch on is the case of director Diane Paragas, whose 2020 film Yellow Rose was the first motion picture starring a Filipino American actor in the leading role to ever be purchased by an American studio. The discussion questions and student activities in this lesson ask students to work together, be creative, and place the roles of Filipino American film and television artists in the wider context of the American entertainment industry. How do Filipino American artists today defy preconceptions? How do they display their heritage in their work? These are just 2 questions that students will be able to answer after you come with us for a day at the movies.
We hope you take a look at these lessons and use them to learn more, because Filipino American history is important for all students.